I don't go out in my garden anymore. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of what's on the other side of the fence. I never open the curtains that face his house, not since the incident. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love my little patch of green, my meticulously kept flower beds, the small bird bath I'd watch the sparrows splash in. Now, I just hear the silence from next door, and I feel a cold that has nothing to do with the weather. I wish I could show you what made me this way, partly to warn you, partly to have someone, anyone, believe me. But I can't. I can only tell you this, like it's some work of fiction, as if it's just another strange tale on the internet, destined to be scrolled past and forgotten. If you see it that way, then that's fine. But I won't forget. I can't forget. It started in the spring of 2019. I was 28, working from home as a graphic designer, perfectly content with my quiet life in my small suburban house. The house next door had been empty for months after the sweet old woman who lived there, Mrs. Gable, had passed away. I'd grown used to the quiet, the predictable rhythm of the neighborhood. So I was naturally curious when the sold sign went up, followed shortly by a single, small moving truck. I watched from my office window as one man, and only one man, began to unload its contents. He was tall and gaunt, with a posture as stiff as a board. He wore a dark, old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd expect to see in a black and white photograph, complete with a tie cinched tightly at his throat. It was an unseasonably warm day, but he didn't seem to break a sweat. The furniture he carried was sparse and antique. A heavy-looking wooden armchair, a grandfather clock that must have weighed a ton, several large leather-bound books, but strangely, no bed. I watched for over an hour as he single-handedly moved everything inside. He never struggled and never faltered. He moved with a drawn-out economy of motion that was strangely efficient. A few days later, I decided to be a good neighbour. I baked a lemon loaf, put it on a plate, and walked over. I rang the doorbell, its chime echoing faintly from within. After a long moment, the door creaked open, and there he was. Up close, he was even more unsettling. His skin was the colour of old parchment, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were a pale, watery grey, and they didn't seem to blink. A faint, musty smell clung to him, similar to when I was digging up earth while I was gardening. "Hello," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm Jim, your next-door neighbour. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighbourhood. I brought you this." I held out the lemon loaf. He stared at the plate for a long, uncomfortable moment. His face was a perfect mask of neutrality. No emotion whatsoever. "That is unnecessary," he said. His voice was a dry, low monotone, like stones rubbing together. It was deep and resonant, but utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh, well, it's just a friendly gesture," I stammered, my smile faltering. He didn't move to take the plate. He just stood there, his pale eyes fixed on me. I felt like a bug under a microscope. "My name is Abernathy," he stated, as if that were the end of the conversation. He didn't offer a handshake. "Well, Mr. Abernathy, it's nice to meet you. I hope you like it here." The plate was getting heavy in my hands. The silence stretched on. I couldn't take the awkwardness. "I will not be a bother," he said, and then he slowly closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, stunned, still holding the lemon loaf. I walked back to my house feeling foolish and strangely chilled, despite the warm afternoon sun. I left the loaf on my counter, but I'd lost my appetite. Life next to Mr. Abernathy was quiet. Too quiet. I never heard a television, or music, or the sounds of someone cooking. I never saw him have guests over. The only sign of life was his peculiar habit of standing in his backyard. He'd stand there in the centre of his lawn for hours at once, perfectly still, always in that same dark suit. Sometimes he'd be there when I woke up, a motionless statue against the morning mist. Other times, I'd glance out of my window in the middle of the afternoon, and he'd be there, staring at nothing. He never gardened, he never read. He just stood. One sweltering day in July, I was watering my petunias, the heat making the air shimmer. I glanced over the fence and saw him, standing in his usual spot. He was facing in my direction, though I couldn't tell if he was looking at me. He was wearing that same woolen suit. The sun was beating down relentlessly, and I was sweating through my t-shirt, but he looked completely unaffected. "Hot one today, Mr. Abernathy?" I called out, trying to be neighbourly, trying to pretend that this was normal. He didn't respond for a full minute. I was about to turn away when his head slowly rotated towards me. A mechanical, owl-like movement. "The temperature is of no consequence," he rasped, his voice carrying unnervingly clearly across the yards. I just nodded and quickly finished my watering. I couldn't shake that sixth sense that something was very wrong. The oddities began to stack up, like loose change that eventually becomes too heavy to carry. I never saw him take out any trash cans, not once. I never saw him bring in groceries. His lights were always off, his house a black hole on our otherwise brightly lit street. One evening, a powerful thunderstorm rolled in. Rain hammered against my windows, and wind howled through the trees. A particularly violent gust sent my empty recycling bin tumbling down the driveway. Annoyed, I threw on a raincoat and dashed outside to retrieve it. As I wrestled the bin back towards my garage, a flash of lightning illuminated the entire street, and I happened to look at Mr. Abernathy's house. He was standing at his upstairs window, a tall, rigid silhouette against the glass. And for a split second, in that stark white light, I saw his face. It was pressed against the pane, and his eyes were wide, his mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. It was a look of pure, abject terror. Another flash of lightning, and he was gone. I hurried back inside, my breathing getting out of control. I told myself I must have just been seeing things, but the image was seared into my brain. Why would he look so terrified of a storm? The smell started a few weeks after that. It would come and go, a faint miasma that would drift over the fence on a still night. I thought an animal had died under his house, but the smell was different. I couldn't place my finger on why, but it was. I started watching him more closely. I just couldn't silence that voice of curiosity. One afternoon, I saw him standing by his rose bushes. He reached out with a hand that looked unnaturally pale, almost grey, and touched a vibrant red bloom. As his fingers brushed against the petals, the flower seemed to wilt instantly, its colour draining away until it was a shriveled brown husk. He simply stared at it for a moment before turning and walking back inside with his stiff, measured gait. I couldn't rationalise that. I saw it with my own eyes. The real turning point, the moment I knew something was fundamentally, horrifyingly wrong, happened on a Tuesday. I was in my kitchen making tea and happened to glance out the window that overlooked his driveway. A delivery truck was parked at the curb, and the driver was struggling to manoeuvre a large, heavy-looking crate on a dolly. The driver, a big, burly man, was straining, his face red with effort. As he tried to get the crate up the slight incline of the driveway, one of the wheels on the dolly caught on a crack. The crate, which looked like a freezer or a large safe, wobbled precariously and then tipped over, crashing onto the concrete with a sickening crunch. The driver swore loudly. Almost instantly, Mr. Abernathy emerged from his house. He walked over to the crate, his movements as unhurried as ever. He looked at the fallen box, then at the struggling driver. "Allow me," Mr. Abernathy said in his monotone voice. Before the driver could protest, Mr. Abernathy bent down, not at the knees, but from the waist, like a hinge. He wrapped his long, pale fingers under the edge of the massive crate. And then, with no visible effort, no grunt of exertion, he lifted it. He just stood up, holding the crate, which had to weigh several hundred pounds, as if it was just an empty cardboard box. The driver's jaw dropped. He stared, speechless, as Mr. Abernathy carried the crate up the driveway and set it down gently on the porch. "Thank you," Mr. Abernathy said, though it sounded more like a dismissal. He turned and went back inside, leaving the driver standing there, gaping in disbelief. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking so badly I spilled my tea. That wasn't normal. That wasn't humanly possible. The image of his effortless strength, his rigid, unnatural posture, played over and over in my mind. I started losing sleep. I'd lie awake, listening to the silence from his house, which sounds impossible, but it's true. You know when the absence of noise is almost more distracting than if it were loud? Just like that. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear a sound from his direction, like something was trying to get out. Or in. I had to know. My fear was being eclipsed by a desperate, obsessive need for answers. What was in that crate? What was making that noise? What was Mr. Abernathy? One night, fueled by a mixture of terror and caffeine, I decided to do something stupid. I was going to look inside his house. I waited until well after 2 a.m. His house was dark, as always. The street was deserted. Dressed in black, I slipped out my back door and crept across my lawn. The air was cold, and that odd smell was stronger than ever. I vaulted the low fence between our properties, landing silently on his unkempt grass. I crept up to the side of his house, staying in the shadows. I moved to a low window at the back, one that I knew led to his living room. The scratching sound was louder here, but I couldn't see anything. I peered through a gap in his grimy curtains. The room was pitch black, but as my eyes adjusted, I could start to make out shapes. The old armchair, the grandfather clock, and something else. In the centre of the room was the large crate he'd had delivered. The lid was ajar. The scratching was coming from inside it. I felt a wave of nausea overcome me. I should have run. I should have gone back to my house, locked the doors, and never looked back. But I was frozen in place, a spectator at my own horror movie. Then, something moved in the corner of the room. It was Mr. Abernathy. He wasn't standing. He was crouched on the floor, perfectly still. He was facing away from me, towards the crate. Slowly, he rose to his feet. He moved towards the crate, his steps utterly silent. He reached it and pushed the heavy lid all the way open. Inside the crate, nestled on a bed of what looked like dark soil, was a woman. She was as pale as Mr. Abernathy, her eyes closed, her body dressed in a simple white gown. She looked like a porcelain doll. But then, her fingers began to twitch. Her eyelids fluttered. The scratching sound must have been her fingernails scraping against the inside of the crate. Mr. Abernathy reached in. He didn't touch the woman. He picked up a handful of the dark, rich soil and brought it slowly to his mouth. He ate it. He chewed the dirt with a slow, grinding motion, his jaw moving methodically. I felt sick to my stomach. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from screaming. This was wrong. This was a nightmare. This couldn't be real. After he'd finished his ungodly meal, he looked down at the woman. He reached in and gently, almost tenderly, stroked her hair. "Soon," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle in the silent house. "Soon you will be quiet, like me. The hunger will pass. The noise will stop." The woman's eyes snapped open. They were milky white, without pupils or irises. A low moan escaped her lips, a sound of profound and endless agony. That's what broke my paralysis. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose stone. It skittered across the patio, with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the night. Inside the house, everything stopped. The moaning ceased. The scratching stopped. Mr. Abernathy's head swiveled around with an inhuman speed. His eyes, which I could now see glowed with a faint, internal luminescence, locked directly onto mine through the window. There was no surprise on his face, no anger. There was only a cold, ancient recognition. He knew I was there. He'd known all along. He raised a single, long finger and pressed it to his lips in a shushing gesture. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. A cracking of dry skin that didn't reach his dead eyes. It wasn't a human smile. It was the predatory grin of a thing that had only ever pretended to be human. I didn't wait for another invitation. I ran. I scrambled over the fence, tore across my lawn, and burst through the back door, fumbling with the locks. I ran through my house, locking every door, every window, my breath coming in terrified sobs. I collapsed in my living room, my back against the front door, and waited for the sun to rise. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his glowing eyes, that horrifying smile, the woman in the box. The police report lists Mrs. Gable, my old neighbour, as having died peacefully in her sleep. But I'd seen her picture. I'd seen her face in the local paper's obituary. All of a sudden, it struck me. The woman in that crate, the one with the milky white eyes and the scratching fingers, was her. Now I understand. The smell, the unnatural strength, the way he eats the earth, the way he never changes. He isn't alive. He's something else, something that wears a human shape, like a costume. And now, he isn't alone. He creates more of his kind. He was bringing Mrs. Gable back, quieting her, turning her into another silent, standing thing, like himself. I never called the police. What would I tell them? They'd think I was insane. They'd lock me up, and he'd still be there, next door, standing in his yard. So now, I just hide. I work, I eat, I sleep, but I never feel safe. Sometimes, I still hear the scratching, but it's almost like an echo, very quiet. But when the wind is just right, I think I can smell 2 sources of decay instead of 1. Every time I see a moving truck on a new street, a cold dread fills me. I wonder if it's him, or one like him, moving to a new neighbourhood with a heavy, soundproofed crate. I wonder if he's found a new garden to stand in, a new neighbour to watch with his pale, unblinking eyes. I don't go in my garden anymore. I'm afraid that one day I'll look over the fence and see 2 figures standing there, side by side, perfectly still in the afternoon sun, staring at my house, waiting.